So how far now? What's been going on? What's it been like in Calabar? I've not really heard much. I mean, I know there was some protests, but it's like it's been really rainy.
Not necessarily. I think what's perhaps happened in Calabar is that there was some attempt, but it didn't quite blossom.
Yeah, okay. I see.
Yeah, so we didn't. So you hear some of the members of the political elite, from the southern part of the country say they are not part of the protest. So
Yeah, I
I
see.
mean I can't speak. Of course, there was. I mean I could follow that on the news. Some kind of or some protest in Rivers State.
Yeah,
But I doubt that there was anything significant in Akwa Ibom or Bayelsa.
yeah.
Yeah, so you've had that part of the protest, in terms of its. I don't want to use the word appeal, regionally, um,
Or geography.
but yeah. So there's also the fact that I think some monies have exchanged hands, you know. So some governors, I guess, doled out some cash in their own state, you know,
Right.
which perhaps is some, points. The significance of that is that maybe even people, Nigerians in those places aren't particularly maybe enthusiastic. But yeah, I guess that there's a little of that. So the governors who have identified hot pockets within their states and
I bought people off.
they've quelled it with yeah. And you know, part of the citizenry in those states will say, no, that NSAS was costly, and that they're poor states.
Yeah,
So in general, I think there's the state dynamic,
yeah.
to the protest.
I think there's also ideological aspect of like demobilization in the south and southeast, which is the narrative that, especially in southeast, from what I've heard, that like
Hmm.
we told you this Tinubu thing was going to be terrible anyway,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and we're going to be scapegoated if we actually come out to protest.
yeah.
So like we're just going to let it, which if that's the case, then that's a quite sophisticated kind of discussion, isn't it? Where people are like, we disagree so much that we're going to avoid protest. Like we disagree, so we're going to avoid protesting.
Hmm.
Like we disagree, but we see the possible political messaging that will emerge from our protesting, so we're sitting it out.
It's a protest. It's a form of protest.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't know how true it is, but if it is, that strikes me
It's
as.
it's largely it's largely true for the southeast.
You think so?
No, I know a great deal in the southeast. I don't know whether you can then extend that inference to the south, but in the southeast, I know that
Yeah.
some of that sentiment is. If we no votes, we didn't vote for this guy now, so why should we? I mean,
Yeah.
go out there.
Like we've already protested.
Yeah, which is like you say, some. I don't know whether if it's, for me, it's not even the sophistication of it. It's for me, it's more like the protest. You know, everybody agrees. I mean, to a large section of society agrees for to the grounds for the protest,
Right.
whether they are going to participate in it or not. Yeah, or how they decide to participate in it or not. Because you can't logically say that because there are no protests in the southeast, saying that the southeasterners now in law of Tinubu passed now.
Uh-uh. And plus, it seems like business was still grounded there now. That the economy was still kind of depressed there during the days of the protest. I mean, I was just seeing some images from Imo and Onitsha that like people were like, oh, streets were empty. I mean, I think there was some shooting in Imo. I think like in the days leading up.
No, I know that there was some shooting. Yeah, there was some shooting. I heard that there was some shooting in Imo
Yeah,
on the day before, the
exactly.
commencement, or the day before the 1st of August, I
Yeah.
think, or maybe even on the first. Yeah, so they also have all that
Haha.
IPOB thing,
Yep. Yep.
ongoing. I mean, for the Southeast, ongoing there. So that's something that,
Which complicates the case.
yeah, they have to deal with too. Then, there's this ruling party propaganda, this Ibophobia.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
creeps into the narrative from the ruling party.
Yeah.
You know,
For sure.
I don't think that in measures that's like a significant part of why protests haven't quite caught any real steam in the southeast. But
Hmm.
I think that's worth mentioning.
I agree. No, that makes sense.
It's irritating because it tries to frame some of these things as this is an able protest.
Yeah.
It's being led by the opposition. It's almost like you just want to keep this whole thing on the head of somebody.
Yeah.
But that's not flying. Everybody they buy fuel now.
Yeah. And of course, you want to confuse your own followers. Yeah. You want to confuse your own followers or make your followers believe that they are the victim.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? So if it's orchestrated by some uh, political figures with a certain kind of evil agenda, then you can argue, oh, okay, actually we are the victim, so we should be get on the defensive.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that resonates. That would resonate more, you know, than to say, for instance, that
The economy is working.
yeah, and many other things. To even say that, well, because it's clear to them of that Showore is in the front of this.
Yeah,
That kind of narrative doesn't stick with him, does
yeah,
it?
yeah,
The Southwest is from the same part of the country with the president.
right.
So rather than call him directly, you start to hear stuff like sore losers, activists,
Yep.
all sorts of crap. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing too is like if you draw out the fact that the Shori people, AAC, TIB are more central, then it elevates the ideological debate, which they want to avoid.
No, yeah, of course. Hmm.
Because I think that the narrative has been that there's a common sense approach and then there's a populist approach to economic management, that those are the two things, those are the only two alternatives, and
Hmm.
that they are giving us the common sense
Hmm.
approach. And even the idea of dismissing things as like dismissing alternatives to neoliberalism as what's it called as I mean, what are the terms they use? Things like immature or um, even those dismissals, they're slowly trying to back away from, because what if people are like, no, we prefer to be immature rather than to die? So it seems like the government's narrative has really like tried as much as possible to avoid the key questions, to minimize the fact that people disagree with the economic approach, and instead to deflect in all these other directions, violence, through risk of violence, the possibility that there's some political interest, quote unquote, behind the protest. Then there's also even the notion that there are foreign interests behind the protest. I don't know if you've seen that kind of discussion too.
That's the general response.
Yeah,
From from the guys, the clowns who are in power now.
yeah,
But it's a bread and butter issue. For me, I think that position is
yeah,
a stupid and silly one.
yeah, fundamentally, right?
If you have teenagers on the streets protesting in Brno, say for instance, and then you
Mm-hmm,
have
mm-hmm,
young adults protesting in Kano,
mm-hmm.
say for instance, and then um, you begin there have been sightings of the Russian flag in in some of these protests,
Yeah,
especially across the north. You would now even, I mean, the logical thing to say is that it's not that there's foreign intrusion. I mean, if that's what you're using as the base, but I mean, I think that even those arguments of foreign intrusion, even predate these sightings of flags. So
mm-hmm,
um, me, I put down the response of the ruling party to um, it's more like a pretending people who are pretending to be asleep kind of thing. You know,
yeah,
um, because it's hard to imagine that you taking off. subsidy, even if partially, for the greater part of 1 year, and you haven't done anything, anything substantial that the
Yeah,
people
yeah,
can feel,
yeah,
So you keep on reeling out stupid policies, or initiatives, that hardly even meet the needs of a million people, in one fell swoop, and then you're pushing that, yeah, as as the counter narrative to us to say no. Those people are saying we can't buy fuel for 700 naira. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I want to say that I guess, we kind of have a bit of a structure emerging for the conversation. Of course, we're starting to talk about the propaganda. Um,
Mm,
but I think there's an underlying question there to address before we come to the protest itself. And return to the question of the geography and sociology of the protest, which I think is probably what we should spend the most time talking about. I think the question of the propaganda ties to a wider question about why why the protest happening right now, which you could frame as like why didn't they happen earlier? And this is a conversation, of course, we've been having for a while, like trying to understand why the response to these policies has gone down the path that it has. Um, but now protests have finally happened, or protests at least that are larger, less organized, and more sustained than the general strikes that we covered before. So, yeah, I guess I wonder what's your feeling on why now? Maybe from the point of view of like why did it take so long, especially because people have been suffering quite a bit, and um, there's been quite a bit of mobilization and anger expressed, but it hasn't really boiled over as it has now. So, what do you think about that? Like, why it took so long?
I think that question is one that I think that many Nigerians are asking, themselves, because the feeling I get is that people are even beginning to say that they're shocked that it took this long. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and that's understandable. It's been over a year, but I think if you ask me, it's the why questions is. I mean, the answer to that it has to be something. It's going to be like a potpourri of
Yeah.
an assortment of some sort.
Agreed.
So it also then boils down, yeah, which of them is more significant. But that within that question, I'd locate that I think that there's a major split in the APC itself. You know,
Hmm.
so there's a bit of rebellion going on. You know, uh, within the party.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
as an organization, and
Okay.
also at one level, within the legislative chambers. y- You know, yes. So that split within the larger body, speaks directly or criticizes the the federal, government, But then there are also dissenting voices within at least, the Senate. Maybe not necessarily the House of Rep, but I'd be slow to say that that split isn't visible. I mean, that's the more radical organ of that, seat of government. But yeah, so I think that that's there. You know.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting you correctly there. Are you saying that there is a oppositional faction emerging in the ruling party that is breaking away from the reform agenda?
Oh yes, I mean that's yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I can say that pointedly for the larger APC. I mean, and it's also beginning to take almost the shape of a regional thing too. So I think that there's a cluster of Northerners within the ruling party who have told Tinubu to his face that this shit that you're doing ain't working, man. I think the most prominent of those guys is some Salisu guy. I don't know whether his name is Salisu Ibrahim. I think he used to be. um, some heavyweight for the APC
Oh,
in the
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You mean Lukman,
Lukman, yeah,
Saliu Lukman?
the Saliu
Yeah,
Lukman,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, that's it, yeah. So
yeah, yeah,
and this guy has piled on for the last at least 2 months, you know, um,
yeah.
critiquing and criticizing Tinubu, you know. Um, I'm beginning to follow a bit of something I don't usually. I'm beginning to follow a bit of Farouk, the journalist. Um, so that's
Okay, Barogi.
yeah, Kairogi. And then when you look at digital media space, there's Dan Balo who's using satire to do on Imagine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dambello, who hopefully will be on the show very soon, is a Nigerian scam performer par excellence, you could say. Um, but no, I mean, it's an interesting point you raised about Lookman. Before we get to the popular side of the equation, like the elite side of the equation, in terms of like some elite disgruntlement about the reform agenda. But I think, I mean, I don't know. My sense is that people like Lookman are really in the minority, you know, because
Eh,
in the APC, at least the vocal opponents of the agenda in the APC.
yeah, but if yeah, but there's a division. There's a division.
Okay.
What then happens is no matter how small the members of one divide, are, it's what they say resonates with the greater part of the public. So
Yeah.
they might be small. Yeah.
I guess. But me, I feel like people like Lookman are actually, I mean, him in particular, responding to the wave of popular energy than they are architects of it. So
Hmm.
if that's the case, it will still beg the question of like why the popular energy has kind of balled over right now. You know, because I don't want. Basically, I'm saying I don't want to give him credit for the protest breaking out. But yeah,
No, like I start, yeah, no, like I started out saying, yeah, it's a mix of many things, but it then depends on what one considers to be more
yeah,
significant. But I also think that the NLC, uh, that negotiation process with the government,
yeah,
that was
yeah,
long drawn out, was one major part of the puzzle that kind of suspended um, disbelief at
yeah,
the economic policies of this current set of I'll use it that French is appropriate,
yeah,
that this
yeah,
current set of charlatans. But it's instructive that it's almost immediately after they reached a resolution, which wasn't quite favorable to a sizable chunk of the Nigerian people. That people are then saying, okay, you guys have done your own, let's do
yeah,
our own.
yeah,
Yeah, and of course, that it's been brewing since people had been increasingly getting tired of the NLC.
yeah. That's fair. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I think that's also there. Yeah.
Yeah, I buy that. I think the coincidence of the the farcical announcement of a new minimum wage, the three bosas
Hmm.
that were given for the new minimum wage, were the first shots of the
Hmm.
protest to come. I think because the NLC really exposed its illegitimacy, or at least like really exposed how underrepresented Nigerians are. So it's like we have to represent ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, and also I think that's also a reflection of the fact that um, the Nigerian workforce that formal, I guess, that the NLC covers it pales in significance to when you look at the structure to the more informal. So
Mm.
I don't know, that 70K minimum wage guarantee is guaranteed for informal workers in that sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If I'm taking a punt at it, but yeah, uh, that's also a big, wave. But
Yep, yep, yep.
as they say, the devil they do over time for where them Tinubu them did. They kind of get the impression that if you can campaign on the basis of propaganda, that you can also govern with propaganda. So
Hmm. Yeah,
we'll find out.
I guess we will.
I haven't followed the protest this
Yeah,
morning, so but after that speech, I suspect, I strongly suspect that it's either the protest it goes downhill from here, or it snowballs. You know,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
I call it a speech, but it was an insult. You know,
yeah. Very much so. Very much so. I think, a lot of people have also suggested that it sounded to them like the speech was really a speech to the armed forces. You know, that it was telling the armed forces, listen, these protests, let's start to close this down. Like partially because from my standpoint, and I think this goes into the question about the strategy of the ruling party. They seem to anticipate that protest would happen, right?
yeah, mm,
As in, when Tinubu was on the campaign trail promising to remove subsidy, he was saying things like, "If you like, protest." And then even in the inauguration speech, he was like, "Okay, if you like, protest." So and you could argue that the swiftness with which they removed the subsidy and liberalized the currency, even if it's a partial removal of the subsidy, whatever you want to call it, and the extent to which the price was shifted makes sense if you think that there will be pushback. Because it's like, let's bargain really high so that if they push back, we can meet somewhere in the middle, but it will still have been quite a dramatic change from the status quo. Do you know what I mean? So from that standpoint, I think they really did anticipate it, and they're kind of just going through their playbook. Initially, try to deflect it, try to scare off people, then do this ethnic baiting thing. Then if the thing is still sustained, do a little bit of palliatives here and there, and then finally crush it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're increasingly seeing suppression. And in fact, in Abuja, for instance, it's been a series of arrests, among like the left groups particularly that have been at the forefront. So Ayola Babalola was arrested, um, yesterday. One of the planners from the Abuja left group was also arrested yesterday. Actually, Ayola was 2 days ago and he was released yesterday, but then at 2 a.m. last night, they arrested one of the Abuja left planners, who's now, who knows, with police or DSS allegedly. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't either seen the reports from Kano today, but I also wouldn't be surprised, as you say, if we see like a spike in crackdown in Kano. What do you think of that idea that there is some strategic kind of playbook being followed here?
I agree that um, that they anticipated protests. All right, I agree. I mean,
Right.
from the get go, um, I
Yeah.
would come to that conclusion by just observing, the way that, and I think I mentioned this in one of the episodes, that Tinubu then kind of consolidated the power base,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that formation within Aso Rock, the military formation within Aso Rock is called, the guys in charge of.
Yeah.
I know that there was some tweaking that went on there. His choice of NSA, choice of IGP, that whole reshuffle of,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's what, new presidents do. But, there's a way in which
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
when it's carried out, you know that it's being done, in anticipation of something. We'll probably need to give it more time and then revisit the issue. But I'm beginning to strongly suspect that this might be the most militarized
Mm.
civilian presidency. So if you think about it, you'd realize that we've also had
Yeah.
two civilian presidents who had been
Mm.
military heads of state. So if my hunch is right, then that's something to know. Um, yeah, so that's there. But having said that, I also think that you while that anticipation happened and they felt they had dealt with it, they nipped it in the bud, or kind of since they had anticipated it, they kind of taking care of it. I think they kind of went to sleep at some point, and it was natural. They were having an easy, because I mean we've had these conversations about, oh, why is there no response to this? This is been since um, most daring of economic reforms, powered by the Bretton Woods institution since the SAP riots of the 80s, mid 80s, and then why is there no pushback? I mean, we've had that conversation before.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's so I kind of I strongly believe that they kind of went, they were having a field day, and then they went to sleep. You, you know,
Right.
so I think this whole last few days kind of jolted them back. There was one night when I saw um, a sitting governor, a minister on TV,
Mm.
you know, really trying to. Of course, they were talking down on the people, but
Yeah.
and trying to sell. It's almost like they were campaigning all over again. But so the narrative now is that they need more than a year, or they need, you can't begin to see fruits of the reforms in a year. And I'm like, yeah, who are you telling this crap?
Yeah, especially because the ruling class are seeing fruits of the reforms, as in better, like more money to states, private jets for the president, new residents for the vice president. So the fruits are already not only being seen but plucked and consumed by the ruling classes. So I mean, you know,
That's why I
uh,
said they went to sleep. You know,
yep,
Mm.
yep,
They went to sleep. So they got in, and then that's one of the first things that they did.
mm,
You know, 6 months down the line, by the time they announced their own first full budget, um, they were confident enough in the fact that Nigerians were slumbering, so they could
yeah,
just nick. If you leave, the one that got to me was you, the office of the chief of staff,
yeah,
25 billion
yeah,
billion.
yeah, 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 yeah.
These guys know they share money. They know they share money in hundreds of millions again, now billions.
Yeah, million is a poor person's category now. 100 million, so yeah, that's a joke.
Say, it was almost like, yeah, it's almost like they were funding a war chest,
Yeah,
for elections in 2027 from yeah, that's what it was.
yeah, correct. No, I guess Tinubu is also like, he's got to do something about how little support he actually had in the election. So I guess he's like, if I can become the most generous amongst the elite, then maybe that will be one strategy to consolidating power. And obviously, it seems to have worked at least at the level of the National Assembly and the governors, because no one opposes anything he says. Basically, the speed they use to pass his bills, I mean, it's crazy.
That's, if you allow me, that's an element of state capture on a more federal scale. Yeah, that's what it is, and which is why these protests are important, because I mean, you can say what you will about the messengers, or but the timing of it is inch perfect. So yeah, so let's this antagonism
Yeah,
begin. You know, um, let's see how it goes. And
yeah,
so like I said, there's also one of Tinubu's. He's fighting a war on many fronts. To be honest, this probably is the more visible, but I
mm,
insist that there's
mm,
been a breakdown, especially within that ruling party. There's also been there's some
mm,
kind of breakdown ongoing, in the state's relationship with big capital, yeah, so that they're not quite getting,
right.
everybody's not on the same page.
Yeah, that one is more obvious.
Yeah, the
You're talking about the Dangote,
yeah,
the Dangote
you
protest.
know, because it's a mad thing, like my friend points out to me, says
Mm,
we'll see how it goes. Let's see how it goes. Tinubu won't remove full subsidy, won't come out subsidy totally. Dangote won't sell fuel, they won't sell diesel,
Mm.
you know. So it seems like a very pedestrian statement, but it's one that is loaded. So we'll see how they resolve all of that. Yeah, it's a, it's a crazy time.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
you know
yeah,
it's a very potent one.
yeah,
You
very
know,
much
I
so.
don't want to be the guy that makes comparison. You,
Yeah,
but in terms of its potency, um, which is not to say that it might escalate. You know, I mean, it's possible, but there's a vibe about this
yeah,
that's certainly more potent than NSAS was in its beginning stage.
yeah, 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 yeah. I agree with you. And I mean, I think the big question, one of the big questions to address here in the podcast is the role of the left. Um, of course, we've alluded to it already, but obviously, not everybody coming out is on the left and, knows or cares about these left discussions. But on the other hand, it's clear that socialist groups, or left-aligned groups of various sorts are at the front lines on a lot of the barricades. Definitely in Lagos, in Ojota, to a large extent in Abuja. And we're even hearing that to a large extent in various parts of the north. I mean, Kaduna and Kano, you have a substantial quotient of the PRP vanguard, the kind of more protesty, street-oriented faction, dissident faction of the People's Redemption Party. Obviously, the Take It Back movement and African Action Congress have been mobilizing for this from almost day one of the Tinubu administration. Um, so I guess now we're coming to the composition of the protests and such. What is how do you how are you processing that aspect? Are we actually seeing a kind of left mass um, rapprochement developing? Because of course, these left groups have struggled for a long time to reach out to mass movements and to actually conduct mass mobilization. So is this happening now? Have the streams converged in some way? Um, or is that premature to say?
Mm, and you don't supply me the answer to the question. It's, so my answer will be short, which is surprising even to me. It's looking like there is, you know, but then again,
Mm,
knowing where we're coming
hmm
from, I think that it's a bit too early in the day. But
Yeah,
another thing to add to that is that however that pans out, the way in which that pans out will most likely be the defining point of
yeah,
um, how these events play out.
yeah. This election cycle.
So
Yeah,
we'll see, because I know that there are people, there are Nigerians, maybe a small subset of us, who process this, saying that Shore, who struggles with 5,000 votes, 10,000 votes, 20,000 votes. Once he loses an election, he
yeah,
comes with this, and that's there. That's probably even a valid critique. Um, but that's has nothing to
mm,
do with the moment. It's a revolutionary moment, and he seized it.
yeah,
Um, he might have
yeah,
been you know grabbing at straws before, but this one he's hit it.
yeah,
But it's bigger than him anyway, so it's almost irrelevant. You know,
yeah,
uh, it's
yeah,
it's the moment. I don't know what Shore's influence is in the north. Where it seems to have
yeah.
gathered the strongest momentum.
No, yeah. My sense is that he's the Showray left. So
Hmm.
TIBAC, Showray aligned left, um, is not at the lead in the north. I think where they are, where they're definitely taking the lead is in Abuja and Lagos. Where of course there has been quite a turnout, but the energy in the north definitely looks like it's coming from a few different directions, of which the Shori left is not the most prominent,
Mm,
and even the left that I was referring to in terms of the PRP Vanguard, they have been doing a lot of underground mobilization in Kano for a long time, and they
mm,
were telling us just watch Kano. They've been saying
mm,
watch what's happening, watch what's going to happen in Kano.
mm.
So it's clear that they are part of this in some way, but I think it would be reductive to say that it's all about them or that it's primarily about them because yeah, obviously this has a life of its own, and it's a convergence of different kinds of efforts and initiatives. I mean, in fact, today, starting yesterday and increasingly today, I've been seeing images of people waving the Russian flag in the north. Have you seen this?
I mentioned it already in part of
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's it's it's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
we'll see what that means because I'm not it makes me laugh.
yeah.
Yeah, it excites me in a very notorious way. It excites me, you know.
No, I mean it's crazy. I mean, I would say that it's
It's got people panicking, you know.
for sure, for sure, for sure, for sure. I mean, people are
Yeah.
worried about that, and I would say that that element, is the more open-ended element for sure. Um,
Mm.
because it gives kind of Sahel solidarity.
Yep. Yep.
It's kind of to me, it's kind of them saying like, actually, maybe our brothers down the street in Niger are not so crazy after all. You know, um, given that yeah,
Mm.
the conditions are very similar, intense insecurity, um, like generationally terrible inflation rates, etc. So I
Mm.
guess from that standpoint, you can see why. Um, like that flag has become a symbol of like something dramatic has to change
Mm.
across the Sahel. So for people to be raising it in the north in Nigeria, well, maybe that's not all that surprising as you're saying.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's what the initial impulse is. I mean, with regards to how you want to think about it or how to frame it, you know. And I guess that there's no other way to think about it, at least not for now,
Yeah,
you know. But just because it's frightening to the political elite, political class, that just excites me,
yeah,
the most. Uh, but I think that the broader implication of some of this, you know, things, these issues that we're trying to trash out is what it means, or what it meant, or
yeah,
what it means actually. Sorry, for for the power base
yeah,
of this, the current, this current, class of clowns, who are in power. Um, yeah,
yeah,
because
yeah,
yeah, it's for me, it's a fracturing, of that base of
yeah,
how Tinubu actually came into power.
yeah, yeah, fair.
That northwest support base,
Yeah, although couldn't you argue, Mega, like, couldn't the pro-Tinubu analyst argue that the protests in North and Southwest have been most pronounced in areas where Tinubu already lost during the election? So Kano, Lagos, and Abuja. Um, of course, there have been some protests in places where he won, like Katsina, Jigawa. Um, but Kano was the epicenter of like opposition activity in the northwest, and Lagos epicenter in the southwest. So couldn't you argue that no, this is just urban anti-Tinubu sentiment that matches the election results already?
hmm, interesting. So if you narrow it down to states, those two states, that
Hmm.
would be interesting. No, I can't remember off the cuff. I can't remember what the election results in Kano was. I know that NNPP won. Yeah, but I don't know. Was it the PDP that came
Yeah,
second in Kano? No, it couldn't have been. It was APC. Yeah. So yeah. So that's yeah.
it
So
was
yeah.
APC, I
So it was
think.
the
Yeah.
same thing as Lagos. So yes, that's why I say that. Yeah. If you're
Yeah.
going to make that argument, then it's just an argument. It's not reflective of. For me, it's not. It doesn't quite capture what's ongoing, because even though he didn't come first, he got a
Yeah.
sizable
Okay.
chunk of the votes there too. So which means that
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in Kano, like 45.
yeah, so
It was the second. They were second anyway in Kano. Yeah.
yeah, but I think that the point that I try to make is that it's like that whole okay, Tinubu, you wouldn't have been president without the North.
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
There's no way it would have happened.
Sure. Sure.
You know.
Yeah.
So what I want to see now is, now that it's obvious that the biggest threat, opposition to your government is coming from
Hmm.
that part of the country where you got your biggest numbers in terms of
Yep.
votes. Are already
Yep.
saying, and rightly so, that dude, we don't understand this crap, and they're defying their clerics to say this. They're defying their traditional rulers to say this.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
I want to see how you're going to spin propaganda against using that ethnic base, against people who gave you your most votes. I'd like to see it- that level of
Yeah.
disrespect.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'd like to see some Islamophobia, yeah, or some sort. So let's see how that goes. That's why I say it's a potentious moment. It's a
Yeah.
moment that is very pregnant.
I agree.
And part of why I like that they are dealing with the show is these are guys who would probably match you for propaganda
Oh yeah. Yeah.
if you want to go that
Yeah.
route.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It was funny to see Shore, for instance, release the presidential speech before the president gave the speech. I mean,
I'm telling you.
you know, ah man, yeah, yeah, your terminology, clowns in chief, just came back to mind. That these guys are so incompetent. I mean, and the speech was so uncompelling, like, just absolutely no charisma to the speech at all. Like, literally pouring expensive fuel on the protest fire. I think definitely played into the hands of people like Shore. So I guess as a way of wrapping up, I mean, there's some interesting trends that we have not necessarily addressed head on. That I wonder how you would respond to. One is this. I don't know if you noticed in Jos, there was a preacher um, who had actually been mobilizing quite a bit in the weeks before the protest, and then held a service yesterday outdoors, like at the protest ground. Um, contrasting in some ways, with some of the religious leaders, like including Muslim religious leaders who were saying, oh, protesting is haram and such. Of course, there were Christians who were saying the same thing. Oh no, let's give the government time and such. But I mean, I guess to tie this into the wider discussion, are we seeing a kind of new coalition emerge in Nigeria, that kind of, you know, anti-neoliberal coalition, perhaps, cutting across religion, across regions, unifying a left protest, a left activist tendency with more of a mass movement? Or is that, yeah, I mean, am I being a bit optimistic saying that here? What do you think? Because I guess the background to the question is to say that for us to really see a dramatic shift in policy making in Nigeria, um, it would require a new mass coalition, right? That is national, it's cuts across regions, and that is mass, in the sense that it it plugs into popular organizations, even if some might be religious and such. So, um, yeah, I mean, is that already happening in some ways, or are these the first moments of it? Is this a continuation of a trajectory, or is it as yet unclear?
To be honest, I think you've asked this question in maybe in a somewhat different in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I opted for a very short answer. You know, but yeah, but you know, now that you mention it again, I think that I haven't quite followed. I didn't quite follow. I mean, I heard about it. So you're not the first. This is not the first time I'm hearing about it.
Mhm.
But my day is kind of. I was up and down yesterday, so I hadn't quite paid any real attention to the just procession thing. Um,
Right, right, right.
so how do I then respond to you? I'll say what
Yeah.
I think I noticed is that
No, yeah, but even beyond just, right?
yeah. So what I think I've noticed, yeah, in terms of how this coalition is beginning to shape up, is that away from the NSAS thing, there's not been this craze for celebrities,
Mm.
joining. In fact, they have stayed away from this, up until now,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not quite the same. It's not a middle class thing, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe lower middle
Yeah,
or an informal sector.
yeah. So I think so. That's something that unconsciously I'm beginning to pay
Mm.
attention
Mm.
to. Um, I'm perhaps beginning to do that because I know that some of the guys who are in the forefront of this protest had serious critiques of the NSAS protest or criticism
Yeah.
of the NSAS. That I mean, in the aftermath of it. Um, so it'll be interesting to see how they do things differently, um, and they are
Yeah.
doing things differently. Um, so you have their representatives
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing the media rounds really strongly. Um, you, so that's while that was missing the answers thing. This is there, and they're actually talking to Nigerians. Um, and perhaps more through traditional media than social media. Um,
Mm.
but of course, you know that once it buzzes on social media, um, there's a tendency for it
Mm-hmm.
then to be more middle class than more upper middle class. So that stratification is something that is out there. So but I can't see clearly what the coalition is. To be honest, maybe
Yeah.
maybe because I haven't done the work uh, to find out. But yes, I agree with you that the way it's shaping up, is shaping up the elements that are at play here that are bringing this thing into.
Yeah.
How do I say this? It's markedly different from the NSAS one, so it's an interesting thing to watch.
That's a fantastic response. Very interesting because I posed the question in ideological terms, but you sort of responded in class terms to say that, well, yeah, the additional bit is to say, that like, yeah, actually it's the coalition that is emerging is more of a working class, informal sector and lower middle class coalition. And, another thing I'll throw in there is that some of the images from the north really, the guys coming out, they really look like more teenagers and like people in their really early 20s maybe.
Hmm.
So in that sense it's kind of more Gen Z, whereas maybe NSAS was a little more millennial. Of course there were Gen Zs there too, but mid 20s, early 30s and such. So yeah, I agree. That is interesting, and definitely worth watching to see how that evolves. Whether that does give birth to a new kind of coalition indeed. I guess a final question, Megan, is more future looking. Where do you see things going from here, from the point of view not of the protests but of the reforms? Do you think Tinubu will budge, or do you think he'll dig in his heels?
I mean, I think that they're a bunch of clowns.
Mm.
I mean, I think that the general feeling within their camp is that they're not going to budge.
Yeah.
You know, After all, who are these guys? And that's why they framed it as sore losers, enemies,
Yeah.
and all sorts. So in their minds, they are not going to budge. That's the current
Mm.
stand. You know, before that speech, I think they were clear on the tactics, of which repression, of the protest was is a major one. I'd like to see how that has changed, or if it has changed, with the response, that they've gotten thus far, which is largely that they are clowns. Actually, I mean, I think Nigerians now know that a large chunk of Nigerians now, it's clear to them that these are a bunch of incompetent brats, spoiled. The way I see that they're like spoiled brats, yeah. So I don't know for how long or how long it'll take them to realize that they're going to have to
Yep.
compromise.
Yep.
You know, um, it might take time, but it's. I think that's where we're headed.
Yep.
You know.
Yep. Yeah. But the only thing I would add to that is that it still looks like they're looking for the promised investment wave that's supposed to come after they sustain these reforms for X number of months. That will be the only thing that will get them to make any adjustment. But until that happens, it looks like they're gonna still, you know, appeal to the people they think are their real constituencies in policy terms, which is the international finance institutions and quote unquote foreign investors who we keep waiting for, like Godot. So I suppose it's likely that we'll see increased or different kinds of popular mobilization. It might look similar to what we're witnessing, or bigger, or smaller, or might look very different. But in any case, it's very likely to continue in some form, right?
Yeah. By the way, I think that title might just be the title for them waiting for Godot, right? But yeah, to the more pressing question, I think that if the protesters, or the lead formations of the protest, you know, don't drop the ball, manage to keep their fingers on the button, this is the kind of antagonism that Marxism thrives on, that socially. Yeah,
Yeah, indeed.
it's a question of how the decision by the ruling class, that decision to stall, and wait, or to even go frontal and try and repress the protests or protesters.
Yeah,
I think that's what will make or mar
yeah,
this for them, because that's probably how they are going to then swell the ranks of the protest.
yeah.
Uh, because these are life issues, they're bread and
Yeah,
butter
agreed.
issues. It's There's nobody,
Agreed.
even the upper middle class, everybody they pinch everybody. No, Let's nobody fool anybody. Um, More so outside, that Lagos uh, axis, or that
Yeah,
whole, yeah, because that's another complexion of this protest. It's not, you're not going to come and label it and say that it is.
yeah,
How did they label the ends house one? It's the digital natives, so it's not a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
guys pressing keyboards. So,
Yeah, it's not a TikTok protest.
so we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, we'll keep exploring these issues. I mean, in the days to come, I think this is probably one of a series, probably, of conversations we'll have. And obviously, OAG was missing today, so we've not even heard his take. And like I mentioned earlier, we'll try to have some guests, perhaps including Dan Bello, maybe others, reflect on this from the perspective of social dynamics in the North. But I suppose we should probably leave it there for now, given the information we have and given the fact that some of us are needed at the barricade. um,
I did tell you.
does that work?
Yeah, sure, it does.
All right.
Yeah.